All right, welcome back to the listener's commentary on the book of Genesis. In this recording, we are going to look at the last few chapters of Genesis, Genesis 48 through 50. And just to recall where we are at in the flow of the story, Jacob and all his descendants have moved to Egypt and they've settled there. Jacob is old and he's nearing death. And these chapters wrap up the story that we have seen so far in several ways. First of all, they recall the promises that God made to Abraham and then restated to Isaac and Jacob of numerous descendants and inheriting the land. Additionally, they recount the last words and burial of the last of the three great patriarchs. The three great patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here we get Jacob's final words as well as his burial. Not only that, these chapters also point forward to more of the story to come. And they do so by looking ahead to Israel receiving the promised land. They anticipate that and look forward to that. Not only that these chapters also point forward by Jacob recognizing that his sons will make up the 12 tribes of Israel. He doesn't know all how that's going to play out, but he begins to describe his 12 sons as 12 tribes because of the family lines that are emerging from his 12 sons. And he pronounces final words of blessings, patriarchal blessings over them, all of which look forward to what will happen in the future to not his sons per se immediately, but to his sons as tribes. In fact, as Genesis ends, it implies that there's going to be a sequel, and it really sets the stage for the book of Exodus, which is the sequel which follows. And so what I want to do is I want to read through chapter 48 and just make a few comments as we go through chapter 48. And then we'll summarize some things out of 49 and 50 to help us understand how Genesis wraps up the story and points forward to the story to come. So Genesis chapter 48, beginning in verse 1 says, "Now it came about after these things," pointing back to the end of 47, where Jacob made Joseph swear that he wouldn't bury Jacob in Egypt, but that he would take him back to the family burial lands at the cave of Machpelah. And so it came about after these things that Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is sick." In other words, his death is drawing near. And so Joseph took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. And when it was told to Jacob, "Behold, your son Joseph has come to you," Israel, that is Jacob, collected his strength, sat up in his bed, and Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz," which is known also as Bethel, "in the land of Canaan, and blessed me. And he said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a multitude of peoples, and I will give this land to your descendants after you as a lasting possession." And so he recounts this moment of God appearing to him and God restating the promise to him and confirming that to him. So Jacob then says to Joseph, "Now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to Egypt, they are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine." What does he mean by they're going to be mine? It's not like he's taking them from Joseph. What he means is he's going to formally adopt them and make them heirs of all these promises that he has received. So they're going to be treated like his sons. And we'll see that in the tribal allotments where Joseph doesn't get an allotment, but Ephraim and Manasseh do. They're going to get portions of land promises. And so that's what is being talked about here when it says they're mine. I'm going to adopt them as heirs of my blessings and my promises. "But your children that you have fathered here," Jacob continues to Joseph, "they shall be yours. They shall be called by the names of their brothers in their inheritance." And so they're not going to get their own allotments. Only Ephraim and Manasseh will. "Now, as for me," Jacob says, "when I came from Paddan, Rachel died as a result of giving birth to Benjamin. To my sorrow, in the land of Canaan, on the journey when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, I buried her there on the way to Ephrath," that is Bethlehem. So we get that little clarification what Ephrath is. It's Bethlehem. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" And we'll get this note very shortly that part of the reason he has to ask is his eyes are so bad because he's so old. So who are these? And Joseph said to his father, "These are my sons whom God has given me here." So Jacob says to him, "Bring them to me, please, so that I may bless them." Now, the eyes of Israel, Jacob, were so dim from age that he couldn't see. And Joseph brought his sons close to him, and Jacob kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face again, and behold, God has let me see your children as well." Then Joseph took his two boys from his knees, so they were sitting on his lap, bowed with his face towards the ground, and Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand towards Israel's left, Manasseh with his left hand towards Israel's right, and brought them close to his dad Jacob. And Israel reached out his hands and placed his hands on the head of Ephraim and Manasseh. But what he does is he crosses his hands, and he puts his right hand on the head of Ephraim, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, even though Manasseh was older and Ephraim was younger. In this way, Jacob is recognizing Ephraim as over Manasseh, even though he's the younger. Why? Because this has been the pattern we've seen where God has blessed the younger over the older. Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau. And so Jacob, now recognizing how God has done that and used that, is in his blessing doing the same thing to Ephraim and Manasseh. And so he blessed them. And he blessed Joseph, their father. And he said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who's been my shepherd all my life to this day." Notice how Jacob's faith has grown. And then he describes God as the angel, the messenger who has redeemed me from all evil. May he bless the boys. May my name live on in them, and the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. May they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And so he prays this prayer of blessing over Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, when Joseph saw that his father had switched his hands around, he was upset by that. It displeased him, and he tried to move his hands to the proper sons. But Jacob said, "No, I know what I'm doing, and I know which one is older." So Jacob refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He," meaning Manasseh, the actual older, "he will also become a key people, and he will also be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he is, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." So he blessed them that day, saying, "But you, Israel, will pronounce blessing, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." And so Jacob put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you, and he will bring you back to the land of your fathers." Notice how it hints at the future to come. Jacob acknowledges that he's going to die there in Egypt, and he's already made Joseph swear to bury me in the land of my fathers. Why? Because God's going to bring you back to the land of your fathers. So that's chapter 48. And then in chapter 49, what happens is they gather the whole family together, and Jacob, as the head of the family, the patriarch of the family, he gives words of blessings over each of his sons. And the words he gives are in the form of poetry, so they're poetic words with lots of figures of speech. They can be a little hard to sort out, and you can read through them and see them, but these words are patriarchal blessings that concern the future of the family, now composed of 12 family lines, that is 12 tribes. And we need to make sure we don't think of these patriarchal blessings as like magic in the sense that they make anything happen per se. They aren't magic in that sense. They describe what Jacob hopes for, what he intends for his sons. And in fact, many of the words he pronounces seem based on the sons' actions and decisions and characters. But in the end, they depend on the sovereignty of God if they're going to come to pass or not. And so Jacob takes up his time to walk through son by son and pronounce blessings on each of them. And again, it seems based on the kind of character and actions and decisions these boys have made over their life as Jacob looks to the future and pronounces a blessing upon them. So, for example, with Reuben, the firstborn, in Genesis 49, 3 and 4, he says, even though he's the firstborn, and you would think that would mean he would be first in status. Jacob takes away that status from him, and he gives a reason for it, because he defiled his father's bed. That is, recounting the event where he slept with Leah's servant in Genesis 35:22. Or in the case of Simeon and Levi in Genesis 49:5-7, they're not going to receive any of their own land allotments when Israel goes into the land and inherits the land. Again, based on faith and based on the promise, he's expecting that to happen. Well, they're not going to be given any of their own land. Why? They're going to be scattered throughout the land because of the violence that they did in taking revenge over Dinah. And you can read Genesis chapter 34 about that. One of the key pronouncements in these blessings here concerns the tribe of Judah. And we noted how we saw in the last section, 37-47, Judah as a strong secondary character seems to be changing, seems to be rising to prominence. Well, here, when Jacob pronounces a blessing on Judah, he says the scepter won't depart from him. In other words, he's going to be the ruling tribe. And indeed, as you read through the rest of the Old Testament story, the kings, the Davidic kings particularly, come from the tribe of Judah. In fact, Jesus the Messiah is from this royal tribe. That's why he's called the Lion from the tribe of Judah. And that imagery of lion even shows up in this patriarchal blessing on Judah as a tribe. And so Jacob makes pronouncements like this for each of his sons. And the section with all these pronouncements, these blessings, ends like this. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them. He blessed them, every one of them, with a blessing that was appropriate to him. And so Jacob pronounces these blessings on his 12 sons and the 12 tribes of Israel in Genesis 49. And then at the very end of chapter 49, what you get is Jacob once again announcing that he knows he's going to die soon. I want to be buried in the cave at Machpelah, which my grandfather bought, where Abraham is buried, where Isaac is buried, where Sarah is buried, where Rebekah is buried. It's the family burial ground. Take me back there and bury me there. And so they agreed to that. And when Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet into the bed and he breathed his last, and he was gathered to his people, an idiom for he died, and he's going to be buried in the family burial land. And so Jacob now has passed away, and in the first part of chapter 50, the story recounts Jacob's burial. Joseph, his brothers, and actually a huge entourage of Egyptians all travel up north into Canaan to bury Jacob in the cave at Machpelah. And then after Jacob's burial, Joseph's brothers worry that now that Jacob is dead, will Joseph finally, after holding this grudge, he's been nice, will he take revenge on his brothers because of what they did to him years and years ago? But Joseph reassures them that he will not, and it's in this section where we get that well-known and famous line about God meaning it for good. So the brothers beg Joseph for forgiveness in the name of their father, and Joseph says to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to keep many people alive. So therefore, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones," because he's got all the wealth and power of Egypt behind him. And so Joseph, we see, has this deep faith in God by this point, and he recognizes, looking back over his story, how, yes, they intended evil and they intended to harm him, but God in his sovereignty and his goodness used this not only for Joseph's good, but ultimately for his whole family's good, and in the long run, for the entire earth's good in preserving the promise and the family line. And so with that, Genesis recounts the final days of Joseph in such a way as once again to hint that there's more of the story to come. And so Genesis ends with these words, Genesis chapter 50, picking up in verse 22. Now Joseph stayed in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived to be 110 years old. Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's sons. He also saw the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, who were born on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm about to die, but God will assuredly take care of you and bring you up from the land to the land which he promised on oath to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. He's inherited this promise. He believes this promise. He knows what's going to happen and how God's going to bring them up. So they're living in Egypt, but it's not the end of the story. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will assuredly take care of you, and you will carry my bones up from here. So certain is Joseph that God will fulfill his promise, that when you leave Egypt and you go back to the land of promise, make sure you take my bones with you so you can bury me in the family burial plot as well. And so Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and they embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt. And that's how Genesis ends. And that really sets the stage for and the need for a sequel. There's more to the story. How are we going to get out of Egypt? How are they going to move into the promised land? Well, for that, we'll have to read the book of Exodus. But before we do, let me offer just a little wrap-up of Genesis itself. What we see in Genesis, as far as like the story goes, just some key narrative or story themes. We see the promise to Abraham that's restated to Isaac and reconfirmed to Jacob. And what we see in the narrative, the story, is that that promise is only partially fulfilled at the end. And everyone expects more to come, right down to the final words of Joseph. There's more to come. And yet, seeing how the people of the promise are infected with the same problem as every other human being, we have to wonder, how is God going to bring this about? And what's that going to mean? And how is God going to solve the deeper problem, not just of them living in Egypt, but the deeper problem of this corruption and sin that has affected this family and affects the human heart? So there's more to the story to come. Now, theologically, what we see in the book of Genesis are some really important and key theological themes. In fact, I've spent a little more time with Genesis than maybe I even originally intended, and that I probably will on some other Old Testament books, simply because it lays the foundation for the entire biblical story and for an entirely biblical worldview. And so we need to make sure we recall some of these key theological themes that have shaped the story so far. One of those is, what does it mean to be human? And the answer Genesis gives to that question, what does it mean to be human? Well, it means to be the image of God, the image bearers of God, and thus partners with God in God's reign and rule over the earth. God intends to bring his good rule to the earth, his kingdom to the earth, but he's going to do it with and through his image bearers, namely human beings, both men and women. That's what it means to be human. We are the image of God, created to live in partnership with God and extending his rule over the earth. Another key theological theme that Genesis highlights for us is what went wrong with human beings and what went wrong with the earth, because things don't always seem so good. In fact, even in Genesis, there's a lot of bad in the book of Genesis, and in our own experience, there's a lot of bad on planet Earth. So what went wrong? Well, what went wrong, according to Genesis, is human beings, the very image of God, broke faith and partnership with their Creator, decided to go their own way, and in their disloyalty, they opened the door to and unleashed sin and death upon the earth, and that defiled the whole earth and all humanity. That's what went wrong. That's ultimately the problem that needs to be solved. And God, in both his faithfulness, his goodness, and his power, he's not one to give up on his project. And so God isn't giving up on human beings, and God isn't giving up on the earth. According to Genesis, he's working a plan to reverse the curse and to bring his blessing to all the nations. And how will that story play out? Well, we'll have to read the whole rest of the Bible to see, but somehow through Abraham's seed, through Abraham's offspring, this family that's got its own issues and it's got its own problem with sin and death, this family somehow is going to be the vehicle for God's purposes to play out. And as you read into the New Testament of the Bible, what you see is, for example, the Apostle Paul telling us that the ultimate fulfillment of this promise of Abraham's seed is Jesus the Messiah. He's the ultimate seed of Abraham, Galatians chapter 3. He's the one in whom all people of the earth can be blessed, and in whom, like Abraham, all peoples of the earth can be justified by faith. That is, put back into a right relationship with God, be restored to proper working order, once again, live in partnership with God, and become the kind of humans they were always designed to be. So that's where the story's going. And the Old Testament will tell the whole story of how all of that comes to be. All right, thanks for tuning in to this session of the Listener's Commentary on the book of Genesis. The Listener's Commentary is a listener-supported, crowd-funded Bible teaching ministry that's only possible because of the generosity of dozens and dozens of people just like you. In fact, every month I get a donation report through World Family Mission, and it usually has somewhere between 60, 70, 75 different people on the donation report, all giving $5, $10, $20, sometimes more than that as well. And I am just so incredibly grateful for your generous support. God continues to bear good fruit through this ministry because of your prayers and your faithful generosity. So thanks a ton for it. And if you've been one of those who have been impacted by this ministry, could I invite you to prayerfully consider joining the team of supporters? As this ministry continues to grow, there are increasing costs, and there are a handful of large donors who, if we lost one of them, it would really compromise our ability to continue this ministry. And so if you have been blessed or challenged, impacted in any way, would you prayerfully consider joining the team of supporters? Easiest way to do that is to go to listenerscommentary.com, click the Give button. It'll redirect you to a page, my page, at World Family Mission, a registered nonprofit, where you can put in a dollar amount. If you want to make it a recurring monthly donation, you click a little box that says make this monthly, and all those monies then will come my way to support this ministry so it can continue to grow and help more people learn and live the Bible. Thanks a ton for your support.